The Browns turned their backs on him after he led them to the playoffs in 2023, just to bring him back in 2025 when he was 1 year older with an aging offensive line and fewer weapons to boot. Stefanski never put him in a position to succeed, and while he should be held accountable for his subpar play, his emergence in Cincinnati proved that he may not have been the problem. Granted,
you can't overthink it. I know everything. You like to talk about all that, the chemistry and everything, but those guys are two of the best in the world at what they do. If you can't throw to them and get on the same page as them, then you're in trouble.
Because what Joe Flacco just said wasn't just frustration. It was a warning. Those hands, 9 3/8. Ain't that not bad? I will measure him against other quarterbacks. So, don't skip a single second of this video. And if this story touches your heart, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Let's begin. This wasn't just a shot. This was a warning. And if you really listened to what Joe Flacco just said, not the headline version, not the watered-down media take, but what he actually meant, then you already know this thing goes way deeper than one quarterback, one team, or one bad season. Because that didn't sound like a guy being bitter. That sounded like a guy who's seen the truth up close and finally stopped protecting it. And I'm gonna be real with you, we've seen this story before, over and over again. A quarterback comes in, shows flashes, sometimes even carries a team further than expected. And then suddenly, everything flips. The narrative changes, the blame shifts, and somehow, it's always the quarterback who ends up wearing it. Always. And that's what makes this moment hit different. Because Flacco didn't just speak for himself, he exposed a pattern. A pattern where organizations bring guys in, fail to build around them, fail to use them correctly, and then when things don't go perfectly, they point fingers like the system had nothing to do with it. Let me say that again. This isn't random. This isn't coincidence. This keeps happening. And the crazy part? Fans don't always catch it in real time. Because we're watching highlights. We're reacting week to week. We're caught up in stats, wins, losses, all of that. But behind the scenes, there's a whole different game being played. A game where coaching decisions, play calling, locker room politics, and front office ego can make or break a career before it even gets a fair chance. And when a veteran like Flacco, a Super Bowl winning quarterback, steps up and basically says, "Yeah, teams got this wrong," you better believe that's not just emotion talking. That's experience. That's frustration built over years. That's a guy who's been in the building, seen how things really operate, and decided he's not going to stay quiet about it anymore. Because think about it. If a guy like him can get mismanaged, misunderstood, and pushed aside, what does that say about everybody else? What does that say about young quarterbacks walking into these situations, expected to succeed immediately in systems that might not even fit them? That's the part nobody wants to talk about. Because it's easier to label a quarterback a bust. It's easier to say, "He didn't have it." It's easier to move on. But what if it was never just about the quarterback? What if the system was broken from the start? And that's where this whole thing starts pointing directly at one place, the Cleveland Browns. Because if you really look at what happened there, not just on the surface, but underneath it all, this might be one of the clearest examples we've seen in a long time. And trust me, once you connect those dots, you can't unsee it. This is where the whole thing stops being emotional and starts becoming undeniable. Because when you really break it down, what happened to Joe Flacco in Cleveland isn't complicated, it's a complete system failure. And I'm not talking about one bad game or a couple missed throws. I'm talking about how the Cleveland Browns handled a quarterback who literally walked into their building and saved their season. Think about that for a second. This is a guy who came in late, no offseason with the team, no time to build chemistry, and still managed to lead them to the playoffs. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't happen if you're washed. That doesn't happen if you don't have it anymore. That happens when a quarterback understands the game at a high level, trusts his arm, and is willing to take control when everything is on the line. That's who Flacco has always been. A deep ball thrower, a risk taker, a guy who stretches defenses and forces secondaries to respect every inch of the field. But what did Cleveland do with that? They tried to shrink him. They put him in a system that didn't match his strengths, called plays like they were scared of his arm, and slowly turned a gunslinger into a checkdown quarterback. And once that happened, everything started to fall apart. And this is where I've got to say it. Kevin Stefanski deserves real criticism here, because coaching isn't just about running your system, it's about adapting your system to your players. And that never happened. Instead of building around what Flacco does best, they tried to force him into something he's never been. And when it didn't work, they moved on like he was the problem. But here's where the story flips. Because the moment he leaves Cleveland and steps into a different environment with the Cincinnati Bengals, everything changes. Now suddenly, he looks comfortable again, confident, decisive, filling in around a system built for a quarterback like Joe Burrow, a system that actually allows the ball to move downfield. And what happens? Production, touchdowns, efficiency. The exact same quarterback looks like a completely different player. So let me ask you this. How is it that a Super Bowl winning veteran can walk into one system and struggle, then walk into another and immediately succeed? And somehow, we're still blaming the quarterback? That's the contradiction nobody wants to deal with. Because if Flacco, with all his experience, all his arm talent, all his understanding of the game couldn't succeed in that environment, then what does that say about the environment itself? What does that say about the coaching? About the structure? About the way things are being run behind the scenes? And more importantly, if they couldn't maximize a guy like him, what chance does any young quarterback have walking into that situation? This is where it goes from bad to straight up chaos. Because once you zoom out and look at the full picture, the Cleveland Browns aren't just struggling at quarterback, they've become a quarterback graveyard. And I don't say that lightly. I'm talking about a place where expectations are sky high, pressure is constant, and somehow nobody ever comes out better on the other side. Let's start with the obvious. Deshaun Watson, a $230 million fully guaranteed contract, franchise quarterback money, superstar expectations, the guy who was supposed to change everything. And what happened? Injuries, inconsistency, pressure building, every single week. Now, instead of being the solution, he's become the biggest question mark on the roster. And when your entire organization is tied to that kind of investment, that's not just football anymore, that's desperation creeping in. But we've seen this before too. Think about Baker Mayfield. First overall pick, energy, swagger, led them to a playoff win, had the city behind him. And then what? Doubts, criticism, system changes, pressure to be something different. And just like that, he's gone. New system, new team, new narrative, same pattern. And this is where it starts to feel uncomfortable. Because it's not about talent anymore. It's about what happens after the talent gets there. Because every time a quarterback walks into Cleveland, it feels like the same cycle starts over again. Hope, expectation, confusion, blame, repeat. And now you've got fans, real fans sitting there like, just give us anyone else. Think about how wild that is. They're not even asking for a superstar anymore. They're just asking for something different. That's how deep this thing goes. And when the fan base gets to that point, that's when you know the system is breaking. Because they don't trust it anymore. The media doesn't trust it. The locker room feels it. And the front office, they're scrambling. Now enter the draft conversation. This is where things get even more dangerous. Because instead of clarity, you're seeing confusion. Instead of confidence, you're seeing panic. Talking about prospects who aren't ready. Reaching for players who don't check all the boxes. Trying to convince themselves that this guy might be the answer instead of actually knowing. And I keep coming back to the same thing. They don't have a plan. They don't have stability. They don't have answers. And you can feel it in every decision they make. Every move feels reactive. Every move feels rushed. Every move feels like they're trying to fix yesterday's mistake instead of building something for tomorrow. And that's the part that should scare every young quarterback watching this situation unfold. Because this isn't just dysfunction anymore. This is dangerous. Dangerous for development. Dangerous for confidence. Dangerous for a career before it even gets started. Because if you walk into a situation like this where the system is already cracking, where the pressure is already overwhelming, where the direction isn't even clear, you're not stepping into an opportunity. You're stepping into a storm. And the real question is, who's next to walk right into it? Let's flip the whole narrative right now, because this is where people got it completely wrong. Shedeur Sanders was never the problem. Not for a second. And the more this story unfolds, the clearer that becomes. Because when I look at Shedeur, I don't see a risky prospect. I don't see a maybe quarterback. I see a guy who's already operating like a pro. Calm in the pocket. Sharp decision-making. Arm talent that jumps off the screen. And most importantly, confidence that doesn't shake when the pressure hits. That's not a weakness. That's exactly what you want in a franchise quarterback. But what did we hear from the outside? He's too flashy. He's too confident. He's got too much personality. Let me translate that for you. He doesn't fit the system they're comfortable controlling. Because we've seen this before too. When a quarterback walks in with presence, with leadership, with the ability to command a locker room from day one, it makes certain organizations uncomfortable. Because now it's not just about the system controlling the player, it's about the player demanding the system evolve. And that's where everything shifts. Because suddenly, the conversation isn't about talent anymore. It's about control. And Shedeur, he's not the type to sit quietly and play small. He's not the type to accept being limited by a conservative game plan that doesn't match his skill set. He's not the type to let a broken system define his career. And deep down, that's exactly why this fit was never going to work. Because this was never about whether Shedeur could succeed in Cleveland. It was about whether Cleveland could handle Shedeur. That's the truth nobody wanted to say out loud. Because when you really look at it, he checked every box you want in a modern quarterback. Accuracy, poise, leadership, big game mentality, unquote. The ability to carry expectations without folding under pressure. But instead of focusing on that, the narrative shifted. They questioned his attitude. They questioned his style. They questioned everything except the one thing that actually mattered, his ability to play quarterback at a high level. And I keep coming back to this. He saw the pattern. He saw what happened to Joe Flacco. He saw what happened to Baker Mayfield. He saw the system, and he made the smart move. Because sometimes, the best decision a quarterback can make is the one that protects his future before it even begins. And that takes awareness. That takes confidence. That takes knowing your value in a league that will question it the moment things go wrong. So while people were out here saying, why didn't it work? Or why wasn't it the right fit? They were asking the wrong question. The real question is, why would any quarterback willingly walk into that situation? Because at some point, you've got to recognize the difference between development and destruction. And that's the line Cleveland keeps crossing, over and over again. Because some teams build quarterbacks. Some teams elevate them. And some teams, they don't draft quarterbacks. They destroy them. This is the part where everything comes together. And once you see it, you can't ignore it anymore. Because what Joe Flacco said didn't just stir up headlines, it confirmed what a lot of us have been feeling for a long time. The system is broken. Not just in Cleveland, but across the league in ways people don't want to admit. But let's start right here, because the Cleveland Browns just got exposed in the clearest way possible. They had a veteran quarterback who proved he could still win. They had a moment to build something stable. And instead of leaning into that, instead of evolving, they went right back into the same cycle. Confusion, control, collapse. And now we're looking at it in real time, realizing this wasn't just a bad decision, this is a pattern that keeps repeating itself. And here's the truth that hits hardest. Shedeur Sanders didn't lose an opportunity. He avoided a disaster. That's the shift. That's the part people are finally starting to understand. Because if a system can't maximize a Super Bowl winning quarterback, if it can't stabilize its own locker room, if it keeps recycling the same mistakes over and over again? Why would any young quarterback trust it with their future? And this is where it gets bigger than just one team, because this isn't only about Cleveland anymore. This is about how the NFL operates. Fans see it, players feel it, but teams won't admit it. They won't admit when their system doesn't fit the player. They won't admit when coaching fails development. They won't admit when ego gets in the way of progress. So instead, they reset the narrative. They blame the quarterback. They move on. They repeat the cycle, but not everyone is buying into that anymore. And that's why this moment matters. Because now you've got players coming into the league with awareness, with confidence, with control over their own path. And Shedeur is right at the front of that shift. A quarterback who knows his value. A quarterback who understands the importance of fit. A quarterback who isn't afraid to walk away from a situation that doesn't serve him. And I'm telling you right now, that's exactly the type of player who thrives in today's NFL. Put him in the right system, with the right coaching, with a structure that actually builds around his strengths. He's going to take off. Meanwhile, Cleveland, unless something changes, and I mean really changes, they're going to stay stuck in this cycle. Searching, resetting, blaming, repeating. And that's the difference between organizations that win and organizations that keep asking why they can't. Because at some point, you've got to face the truth. It's not the quarterbacks, it's the system. And the league isn't ready for quarterbacks who demand accountability. But they're coming. So now I've got to ask you, do you think Shedeur made the right call? Or do you think Cleveland could have been the place to change everything? Let me know, because this conversation is just getting started.